And the reason why is favoritism is bad is because it's using the wrong core values where a hierarchy exists. So it's saying, okay, a hierarchy exists, and the unspoken premise is they exist. The admonition to not show favoritism is you're using the wrong core values where they exist.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Salty Pastor Podcast, where you can dig deep into the Bible and discover answers for yourself through critical thinking skills. My name is Jesse Mayer. I am back from a week-long vacation and back here learning and growing alongside you guys with the Salty Pastor himself, Dr. Douglas Peake.
Well, welcome everyone. Excited about our goal to help you develop your own spiritual growth path. That's what we're focusing on as we study the book of James. It's a great tool that you can use. We're developing this tool to help you have your own personal growth plan. Now, it may be as simple as you write 4 things that you want to develop or see happen in your life. You write them on a sticky note and stick them on your dashboard. That's fine. Maybe you like to go through a little deeper dive and try to be more engaged in the process. And that's why we're doing this tool, and it is available on our website. We're working on trying to get it 100% digitized so you can just do it on your phone. But also, shout out to our adult ministries leadership team, led by Dana Mitchell, and what she's doing over there, getting this thing up and running just for you. So it's there. Please use it because I think you will find it extremely valuable.
So we are in this book of James studying that book, and it's interesting because it reveals all kinds of tools and techniques that are effective for spiritual growth. I mean, even just the entire theme of the book found in verses 2 through 4 of chapter 1 kind of talk about this, says, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything." Yeah,
the main point of James is challenging you and me to grow strong in heart and mind to face any challenge in life. And so what we thought, well, could we come up with a tool that would help you figure out how to grow stronger in mind and heart, so that you can face any challenge? Because it's the process of persevering that grows us strong. So we're going through this process. So this is about a growing faith, a strong faith. It's about your backbone in life, your backbone of convictions that let you know who you are and where you are going.
So let's get specific, because on Tuesday we studied the first half of James chapter 2 and then all of James chapter 3. And the main principles were basically what I took away: don't show favoritism, and then obviously the difficulty or the standard that teachers in the church are held to.
Yeah. Okay. Well, James is addressing the concept of favoritism in the first part of chapter 2, verses 1 through 13. And then he talks about the whole aspect of be careful if you want to become a teacher, because this is how difficult it is. You've got to know where your wisdom comes from. It comes from God. It can't come from a selfish or envious place. That's at the end of the chapter. And he talks about controlling the tongue, because the tongue is what is going to undermine you, and inconsistencies and all that kind of stuff. And I think both of these are very important to understand is that James is speaking and teaching from a presumption. It's an unspoken premise, right?
Okay.
And the unspoken premise is this, is that favoritism is bad, as well as trying to be a teacher when you're not able to control your tongue, or where your wisdom of teaching comes from, is bad. It has to do with what is known as a hierarchy. And today you hear a lot about hierarchies. This is really going around a lot. It's really popular in universities and stuff like that, and in the cultural stuff that's going on right now. And the reason why is favoritism is bad is because it's using the wrong core values where a hierarchy exists. So it's saying, okay, a hierarchy exists, and the unspoken premise is they exist. The admonition to not show favoritism is you're using the wrong core values where they exist. You see, that's where he's really challenged. He says when you use the wrong core values, you're sinning. Now, hierarchies exist because human beings are different. And so it's impossible to get rid of hierarchies. Hierarchies are like gravity. It doesn't matter if you like it, it exists. It doesn't matter how you feel about it, it exists. It doesn't matter if you believe it or not, it exists. And it just is. You know what I'm saying? Just like you need air to breathe, hierarchies exist where you have more than 3 human beings that get together. Now, some people think because hierarchies exist, what they do is they say, well, the reason why hierarchies, they look at hierarchies instead of saying they just exist, right? They see them as the problem, okay? And so I think it's really important to understand is that what they do is they think, look, if there wasn't this hierarchy, then we wouldn't have to worry about favoritism happening or any injustice that comes out of a hierarchy. Well, this is actually the same thinking as the Old Testament Jewish law, which ended up not working. That's what Paul makes in the case in the entire book of Romans. And that is law cannot eliminate the problem of the human heart. So if you change the hierarchy, you're not addressing the heart issues at all that cause the abuses in a hierarchy. And then you end up sometimes creating even more abuse with your new hierarchy.
You're treating a symptom versus the core issue.
Correct.
Is kind of what you're talking about, right? Like,
yeah.
They are saying, oh, all hierarchies are bad because abuse happens in them and things are occurring. And so they're like, we just got to get rid of all hierarchies and then suddenly everything will be a utopia because then
Correct.
They won't exist. But what you're saying is really you need to solve the issue in the heart because that's what's then leading to these
problems and abuses.
And issues and abuses.
Because you establish, if you tear down one hierarchy, all you're doing is creating a different one.
Well, because we as humans are naturally drawn to communities, and communities inevitably create some sort of hierarchy.
Yes.
There has to be, otherwise it just turns into chaos, or like it's not really community because then it's just like people near each other.
But even chaos is a hierarchy. Right? It's a chaos and anarchy is the hierarchy of the strongest and most brutal.
Okay.
You see, that's the point. Is
that's every post-apocalyptic movie you ever watch is we have descended into quote unquote chaos, and it always turns out that the humans were the real monsters all along.
Yeah, like Negan in The Walking Dead
or Mad Max Fury Road or like all these different shows. They all basically turn into whoever the most violent.
And that's a hierarchy.
Amoral person they're the ones that end up being the leaders and the mafiosos of
exactly. And this is the deception. See, this is the intellectual deception of all this is that you believe you can get rid of hierarchies, but you can't. And see, this is the fallacy in Marxism. See, Karl Marx, that was his whole point, is that he looked back through all history and he decided, I'm going to interpret history through one specific lens. And he's saying, okay, hierarchies exist. He called them classes. You always had different classes of people. And then he said those in the upper classes always oppress those below. That was his basic premise. However, historically, that's not factually correct. Now, you can actually see people in upper classes oppress poor people in lower classes, but you also have in times when people in lower classes oppress those in
revolution, and then
and these other kinds
execute everybody in the royal
back
family.
And forth, it's back and forth. And so the issue is that Karl Marx's basic theory was hierarchies exist and they're evil, so I want to get rid of them through communism without letting anybody know. And see, this was his deception. This is his falsehood. In socialism, communism, doesn't matter what ism you adopt, it is a hierarchy because hierarchies are just like language, for community to exist, there's a hierarchy. All right. For people to communicate, there's a language. Even amongst deaf people, they use sign language. There has to be a communicative element. If you get more than 5 people together or 3 people together, guess what? You have a hierarchy. You cannot escape this. It is a fact.
So, I mean, we see this ideology permeating our media and production.
The discussion about hierarchies.
Yeah, because
sure.
it's basically everywhere you look these days, as far as whether it's feminists talking about the patriarchy or it's politicians talking about rich, middle, or lower class people. Universities talking about minorities and their representation.
Yes.
I mean, just all of these different quote unquote movements or progression, quote unquote, trying to basically shift these power structures or these hierarchies. And they're like, well, we are not where we think we should be, so we need to balance the scales. But usually it doesn't quite work.
Well, and that's what's really odd about it is in today's world, everybody's talking about hierarchies, but nobody will actually admit how they actually function. See, feminists will stand up and say, oh, we got to tear down the patriarchy because it's trying to oppress women. And so, but when you really dig into that, it's like, there's a lot of logical fallacies in here, and they're not actually representing women. They say they want equality, but they always focus on corporate boards, positions of political power. I've never heard the feminist movement in America say that 95% of all plumbers are male and we need to equalize
have
that.
More female plumbers in our lives.
Or, 95% of the people that, lay asphalt are, males, or, you go through the list. And so it's like, well, the vast majority of men are in prison. No one's saying, well, in order to be equal, we need to lock up more women. And so I guess the point is that it's some people use the notion of hierarchy in a deceptive way. And that's my point. But they exist everywhere and no one gets around them. And in some ways, we really enjoy them. For instance, sports. The sports world is a hierarchy, 100%.
Right.
It's a talent hierarchy, 100%. That is, who can drive that basketball into the lane and score more than the other guy, that guy gets what? More playtime. So see, that's a hierarchy of talent. Hollywood is a hierarchy. It's 100% hierarchy. As a matter of fact, it's one of the most ruthless hierarchies because it uses favoritism, like James talks about, more than anybody else. Who's the wealthiest? Who's the best looking? Who's this? Those are the people that get all the money and all the jobs. Very few. What's really interesting is that Hollywood has massive amounts of wealth, but it is concentrated in the smallest hands of people in the industry than when you look at how many people make up the industry. So I find that really fascinating. Music. Music is a hierarchy. I am not a part of a boy band that is winning Grammys.
But you are implying that you might be part of a boy band.
Well, I am saying that was one of my dreams, I mean, everybody want to steal my girl.
Yeah.
I enjoy that. But that's never, ever going to happen. In academia, it's all about hierarchies, right?
Right.
And the basis or the philosophy of the hierarchy shifts, and when you shift it, there's ramifications here. Let's say let's get even more specific. In science and in medical care, right? In medicine, there is a hierarchy. In medicine, the hierarchy is supposed to be the gold standard, and that is whatever has been proven scientifically to be the most effective is what we do as the gold standard for care, right? Mm-hmm. Well, now there's a huge debate going on about vaccines and their efficacy and how to deal with COVID and how to do this, and all of these health, debates are going on. They're extremely volatile. And why are they so volatile? Why are they up and down like they are? Well, the reason why is because there's favoritism in the process or the hierarchy of medicine right now. And I think one of the things that has been really so sad is that people are saying, well, we need to stop politicizing COVID and all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, well, as soon as the government started making deals with the health industry, which it's been doing for a long, long, long time, then you politicized it no matter what. And then when you have the CDC basing its guidelines on advice from teachers' unions, guess what? You've lost all credibility. You have zero credibility because what you've done is you've taken the hierarchy that was positive and you've shown favoritism. And when you show favoritism, what does that end up doing? It undermines the hierarchy. It just so nobody trusts it. So my point is, regardless of where you live, there's a hierarchy in your family, right? And the bottom line is that Marxist ideology, in particular, has infected our universities to the point where they are attempting to eradicate hierarchies. However, in doing this, you are denying basic human nature. And as a matter of fact, you're denying all nature, because you go out in the animal kingdom and you have a massive hierarchy. You know, it's all about strength, and it's called the food chain. You know, who's the top of the food chain? And so what's really interesting is that why your definition of what it means to be a human being is so important, okay? Because hierarchies exist. You can't deny that. What you have to do is you have to say, are there hierarchies that are good, and are there hierarchies that are bad, and what makes them good and what makes them bad? And see, this is the whole notion, is even though a hierarchy is represented in nature, this is why the gospel is so important. This is why the proclamation of the truth of God is so important, because first of all, God knows human nature. He doesn't deny it. And then you hear all of these interesting statements. Like, this is a hierarchy statement when it says that there will time when he shall bring peace and the lion shall lay down with the lamb. Now, in the nature hierarchy, what does the lion usually do? Eats the lamb.
Yes, correct.
But now they're going to lay down at peace. So can nature bring about a positive hierarchy? No, because it's been corrupted and tainted by sin. Can human beings of their own accord create a utopia that dispenses with all hierarchies? No, they can't. And so the only salvation for humanity, the only salvation for community and for society is when everybody as individuals come into a saving relationship with Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior, because it is only his values that can save humanity. So when we go into the hierarchy of Christianity, it's a totally different hierarchy. And the hierarchy there is that everybody submits to one will. There's only one supreme will, and that is what? The will of God. It's the will of Jesus Christ. So now, will we get that perfect? No. But what we can do is we can always return to the words of Christ and submit ourselves to his authority. And the Holy Spirit, which is live and active in every person who's been redeemed by Jesus Christ, is being guided and led in the same direction. And so when we take the statements of the fruits of the Spirit, we take the values of how we're supposed to treat people, and we weave those into our societal government, what happens? Well, you can see the American experiment was to do just that. And what did it do? Is it inverted the entire notion of how politics and governance works, right? You're governed by the people and for the people, as opposed to the other way around, a monarchy or a dictatorship or any other kinds of things, aristocracy or an oligarchy or anything. And so what's really fascinating about all of that is you take the outgrowth of those principles, they wove them into our basic laws, our basic e-commerce, and some of these things, and what happened is the greatest nation, wealthiest, most prosperous, and, nation, and most diverse and inclusive nation that's ever existed in the history of the world was born. But now what's happening is people are attempting to undermine it and destroy it by thinking that, we'll get rid of all hierarchies. But what the fact is, they never tell you the truth. They don't tell you the truth, and that is that, communism is a hierarchy, and we've seen what communism does. It's the most evil hierarchy that has ever existed. Just the body count, the people murdered, not people dehumanized, but people murdered under communism is absolutely and unequivocally astounding. Anybody who says, I'm a communist, is a kindred spirit with the worst murderers that have ever existed in human history. And those people should not be tolerated as caring or compassionate or anything at all. They are homicidal maniacs, people who say, I want to instill communism over people. It's absolutely and unequivocally the most evil thing that's ever existed. And the reason why is because when it comes to favoritism, that James is talking about here, it is favoritism on massive steroids to the point where it just sins because it denies human nature, it denies God and what God has said about human beings. It treats them as chattel, and it is, I mean, I could go on and on and on, but I won't keep rambling about it because it's just amazingly how bad it is. So the issue is, we got to really talk about society's desire to create utopia by eradicating hierarchies. And so when anybody stands up and says to me or to anybody else, we must be very vigilant to listen carefully when someone says, well, if you want to be a peace-loving person, you have to eradicate this hierarchy. Well, the first thing you got to do is you got to say, well, are you accurately identifying the hierarchy? Do you understand what hierarchies are, which they usually don't? And so if you're saying there's something unjust in the hierarchy, then maybe we should address that instead of throwing the whole thing out. Because when you come back to replace it, you're going to regret anything as an alternative.
So we've talked a lot about these hierarchies, but the other part that we had discussed on Tuesday was about teachers, right? Really, I want to talk a little bit more about, James says, not many of us should become teachers. How does that relate to the hierarchy things? Because I'm assuming it does, because the way of your brain works is you don't usually put two separate topics in the same podcast. So I'm assuming you have a way of talking about these two things. So,
well, I think it's really important because until we understand, the notion of hierarchy and its unspoken premise in the book of James, because James is obviously building his arguments on this unspoken premise or this presupposition, is that it exists in the church. And then in the first century church had a hierarchy. And they had come out of Judaism, which was extremely particular about its hierarchy. The law, and then you had almost 2,000 years of, Torah and all these different things that about scholarship on the law. So, the Pharisees and the Sadducees were in school since little boys, learning all of the intricacies of how every single statement, in the Pentateuch played out in everyday life. And so they had gone to great extent. So all that is it's a hierarchy, but it's a highly defined hierarchy. Okay, extremely defined. Everything you do is extremely clarified. Okay? So there's lots of rules. And what's interesting is Jesus comes in and says, okay, that hierarchy did not actually achieve its purpose, right?
Okay.
And so the purpose was to restore us to peace with God. So the only thing is in this new hierarchy is the redemptive act of Jesus Christ. So he died on the cross to give himself as a ransom for many. And then through his redemptive blood, you and I are now adopted into his family. And so the term, instead of being a nation, we are a family. We're the family of God. We are his adopted children, grafted in, as Paul says. And what that basically means is that in the new hierarchy, God the Father, Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior, is the one will that reigns supreme. And so what happened is there was a group of people, and this happens in the church all the time, is that you put people together in a group and you say, okay, here's how we're going to function. You always have people who try to figure out, it's called game theory, and that is you figure out the game, right? There was a man one time, his son had just graduated from college in finance, and he got a job on Wall Street. And so he asked his dad, because his dad was a very successful businessman, said, hey, Dad, what kind of advice do you have for me when I start working at this place? He goes, son, the most important thing that you need to remember in going to work there is you need to figure out how to score and then score. So what he's saying is go in and figure out the hierarchy. What is it? Don't listen to what they say. Watch what they do.
Yes.
And because, companies and businesses, they always talk about their core values and their mission statements and all this kind of stuff. But that doesn't mean anything. Watch what they do. Where are they really putting the money? What are they really doing? Because every human being, every leader has some level of self-deception, right? Myself included. And so what you have to do is you have to go into a situation and you have to say, what is the hierarchy here? How do you actually score, right? What is it that they actually value? And then what you got to do is figure out how to do that. And so take that notion and put it over into the church, right? The Holy Spirit starts a church on the day of Pentecost. It expands like crazy. Tens of thousands of people are becoming followers of Jesus Christ, right? And then what happens? A great persecution breaks out. And so everybody goes back to their home village or their hometown or whatever. They kind of disperse. They call that the diaspora, which is Greek for dispersion. And what happened is then they start growing like crazy out there, right? And so what happens is some people are like, wow, I'm going to go over there and I'm going to teach on this subject. And boy, that was really, really good, right? And we're going to go over and teach on this subject over here. Oh, that was really, really good. And people are like, wow, here's some money, here's support. Come over here and talk to us. And then somebody else is like, wow, that's really popular. That's really exciting. I want to do that too. Right? Look at that movement. And then what happens is there is a temptation, right, to seek the position, not seek the gift. And that's what he's talking about. See, he's saying you got to be really careful because you're trying to seek the position. Today, we see this all the time, and I call it celebrity Christianity. And people are like, man, look at what these young guys are doing that wear $5,000 tennis shoes, and they talk about all this kind of stuff. All these things are going on. And look at all these. They've got thousands and thousands of college students that are following them. Right? And isn't this awesome? And I'm like, well, I don't know. I would like to consider, but I remember I was reading a book by the guy who started World Vision, and World Vision is a really neat organization. I was right, and or maybe it was World Impact. It was either World Impact or World Vision. I get those two confused sometimes. But anyway, he started it, and he said back in the 70s he went to Southern California, and he'd go into the places like Watts and Compton and all these places, and he'd have these giant rallies, and tens of thousands of young people would show up. And what would happen is he said they'd all come to the Lord, and then I'd go and tell my supporters, and this was so cool and stuff. And then he said I would go back 5 years later, and all those people that came forward to receive Jesus were the gang leaders, the pimps, the prostitutes, the drug dealers, the criminal element, in the exact same ones. And he said that was a crisis of faith for him. It was a crisis of faith. And he realized having a giant following, on the surface, sometimes they go, that is so cool. There's 50,000 people raising their voice to God. And I'm like, yeah, that is cool. But that's not how the church grew. In the first 300 years of the church, it was illegal to have large group gatherings. It was illegal to be a Christian. And so everything happened in secret in very, very small groups. And that, in the last 2,000 years, was the fastest growing time in the life of the church. The church has never grown as fast as it did in its first 300 years. Isn't that amazing to think about that? And so, because what I'm concerned about is that it's not the experience of others or being a part of a community experience, because there's a hierarchy in that as well. It's when you have a confrontation with the living God and you meet him personally in your life. That's when you become a true follower. You see, when you experience death and then brought into life by the power of his redeeming blood. And so I think what's really important to understand about that is I'm not saying don't go to a concert. I'm not saying don't think these things are cool. What I am saying is that don't forget the upstream principle, the foundation on which the gospel and all the prophets stood. And that was, it's not about the hierarchy of success. It's not about the hierarchy of favoritism. It's about the hierarchy of knowing the living God in a personal way. It's your faith. And don't ever escape that, because that is the only true life transformation.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all that with us, Pastor Doug. I mean, those are some pretty heavy thoughts to go into our weekend with, but I think it's an important thing, an important conversation, an important topic to really be thinking about because we are so inundated these days with these ideas of hierarchy and what it means to be a Christian that we really need to be challenging ourselves and using our critical thinking skills and going, okay, I'm taking this information in. Some of it may be accurate, some of it may not be, but what are the repercussions of these thought processes? Thinking further down the line than just what we're being told at face value. So
Correct.
We really appreciate you sharing that with us. You're going to obviously expound upon this a little bit more on Sunday. So make sure you guys tune in for that as we kind of bring this section of James chapter 3 to a close, and we'll move on to James chapter 4 next week. So thank you guys so much for joining us, and we'll see you on Sunday here in beautiful Boise, Idaho.
Blessings.